thought it would be handy just to have a little bit of reflection on what we've done so far in the year, or what's been posted up so far in the year that you can catch up with if you haven't had chance to. Now, we started off with Mole, and she had quite a strong colour palette. Mine was a she, and she was quite elongated to begin with until I started playing with shape, and then that development helped me get to this point, which helped me get to this point. And I hope you can see the sort of this way of working, of having a few ideas that build upon one another really helps when you get to that final artwork. You have more confidence. Obviously, it takes a little bit more time, and you've got to go through frustrating stages of thinking it's not working until it finally does, which is like any painting anyway, but we're doing it in a much more systematic way. And then, of course, once we've got character, we've got a place in which they can live. We kind of understand where they might live. Now, this month with Toad, we're going to go about it place to live first, then character. And I'll show you a bit more about that, obviously, in a minute. We played with a few mock-ups of what our final might be, which turned into this beast, and I really love seeing all of your different interiors that you're creating and building upon each other's ideas as well. And then it was over to Badger, and Badger had a few guises. I really loved this one, inspired by the Pinterest photo, and of course it inspired another charcoal design as well, which is slightly off the style road of where we're going with Wind in the Willows and our collection of characters. But I think it was really nice to practice, and a nice kind of intermission from maybe this smaller work, getting back to your charcoal work where you think a bit bigger and a bit more expressive. And I think it's always good practice to do that. If you're doing a lot of small work, you know, every so often bring it big, bring it large, and then come back in, and the two play off one another. And then last month we were onto Ratty, inspired by Helen's lovely gift set of little statues of characters. And I did a true to life representation of the statue first of all. Then I kind of thought, well, how do I make it my own? And then we brought in collage. And what I'm trying to do each month is sneak in, maybe not sneak in because it's not so, it's plainly obvious, I should say, kind of introduce you to different ways of working. So when we get to the stage mid-year where we're considering designing the full concertina of our characters and Wind in the Willows, it might be that you have a preferred way of working. It might be gouache and colour pencil, it might be collage, it might just be coloured pencil. You might want to create your concertina with found bits of paper. You might just go charcoal. Who knows where we'll get to. But the idea is this is now serving as like a bank of inspiration that we can call upon, and you'll know immediately as you look through which ones really grab your attention. You remember how you felt when you were making them, and if there's joy to be found in the making of a particular process, the doing of a particular process, that is a massive clue for you. So let me just close these fellas up. Now, I'm going to start today on a mock piece of paper. So just a cheap piece of printer paper. And what I want to do is think about how I'm going to be cutting this out. And I don't want to be doing that thinking on a more expensive sheet of cartridge paper. So while I'm doing the thinking, I'll probably put some music on because you might see me making correcting myself as I go. And then at the end, I will, and I might speed it up so you're not sitting through too much. And then at the end, I'll explain my thinking to you and we'll have a definite pattern. Okay, let me catch you up. So I've taken an A4 piece of printer paper and I've folded it into 3, and I've just made some little notes for myself. On the first page, almost like just as a note to say I'm going to be cutting something away here. And the imagery that I want is maybe trees, a fancy gate or flowers, and that's going to go on this part only. Then once I open it up, I want the windows and doors of a house, but not just any old house. I want a grand house. And we're going to cut away whatever the windows are and the doors are on that page. And then you open it up so you've got your flat A4 landscape in front of you, and 2/3 are going to be interior. Now you're going to be cutting away windows in here, so those windows will have little apertures like this, and then we design the interior around those apertures. Then we know that the front page, some of it's going to be cut away, and so I just put a little note to myself that I'm going to cut away there, and that kind of gives me a pattern. So then another sheet of A4 paper, I start to design the elements. So I'm actually going to cut away the shape in between the trees and the railings. Now I've tried to simplify fancy railings as much as possible, because I don't know if you're like me, you have really good intention of cutting things out really neatly but then get bored as you're working your way through it. So I know I stand the chance of doing this well if I simplify these little shapes. You might have seen on the video I started to put a bit of decoration in, and then I reminded myself that no, that will become really annoying to cut out, so keep it simple. So the idea being that all of these bits are cut out and we can see through to what will be the outside of the house here. Now I'll stop talking there on this section. What I'm going to do is cut this out to follow through on that thinking, and I'll speed myself up again. Okay, another little catch up. So keeping my pattern right at the side of me just so I can obviously check which bit I'm working on. And we cut out the gate and the illusion of trees. So you've got a nice kind of aperture going through to the front of the house. Now open that up and you see the front of the house more clearly. And we've got apertures going through to the inside of the house, and we've also got an open door here. And we're kind of alluding to maybe where Toad lives at this stage. We're not giving it all away. And he's living somewhere that is grand enough to have a gate with T on the letters. So he's got his own monogram there. And it's grand enough that it's got steps and a double door opening. And we're starting to give almost a flourish of unusual brickwork. And then when you open it up inside, what we have is a room full of portraits, and we're going to be creating portraits of Toad, and I'm going to show you a quick way of doing that. And then we're creating like his entrance hall with a nice chair, a little table, maybe a pot and a bit of greenery. Now you'll notice I haven't drawn Toad into this as yet, because I'm creating him separately, so we can actually work with this as almost like a bit of a stage or a set for him. So previously, let me just grab Mole, where Mole was fixed into the piece, we're doing something differently here. We're creating Toad separately as a character that you could place in this section, or you could place him in this section, or you could even place him in front of everything, and we'll play around with that as well. But in terms of working from quite a basic pattern to building the idea, that's what we've got. Now I've saved a few photos from Pinterest which have inspired a few of these different elements, and of course I haven't used one as a direct copy. I've tried to mix it up, and feel free to do the same as well. You can use these ones that I've provided, or you can have a look. I was searching for things like grand Victorian home, interior of a portrait room, because Toad is the type of character who would have a lot of portraits of himself, I think. Anyway, that's that bit for the time being. On to the next. So sometimes when I'm unsure about the scale that I'm going to be working in, I will copy on the printer several. I'll take a photograph of the original drawing and I will rescale it, and on one piece of paper I'll have a few different options. Then I cut those out and figure out what might work in terms of the character and the place. And that works in terms of the door. I imagine the gate being huge and big anyway. And then, see, he looks quite small in his surroundings there. Yeah. He looks too big there. A bit menacing for the door. So it could be middle of the road. That works there in terms of scale. Works there in terms of the door. You could even have him stood on the steps, half in, half out the door, peering over the gate like that. So I think the middle one's going to work. And these things are always useful to do, just because sometimes you get an idea or a surprise that you hadn't necessarily thought of in your more linear way of working. So I never waste anything, always sort of stick it in a sketchbook. as a reminder of what I've done and what my thinking process is, but I think that's my scale. And this time round I'm gonna stick to A4 size. The mole, that felt quite huge. I really like it, but I just want something to compare. So I am going to do this one at A4, and then we've got two different sizes, different formats, so when it comes to us making the bigger concertina, we can make a more informed decision as to the layout, the size, the orientation, and the scale that we might want to work to. So I think those two will be a nice comparison. That's the plan. So my first job is to get some cartridge paper, A4 size, and translate this onto that paper, cut out all of the apertures, and that will be that sorted, apart from the colour and the texture, which we'll come back to. I've cut a big sheet of cartridge paper into A4, well, ripped. I've got a nice soft deckled edge there, and I folded it into thirds. It's almost like a leaflet, and already you can feel the sturdiness compared to the floppiness of the cheaper printer paper. Now what you could do is use this as a template, should you want to, and sort of stencil it in like that, or you could just keep this to the side and go freehand and redraw entirely again. And it might be that in doing this, because of these apertures, you might want to make some different decisions about what the house looks like, or where the window is, for example. I'm pretty happy with where everything has landed. You kind of get a sense of it, and then there's an extra reveal. So I'm happy with that. I'm happy with the inside, that's all good. So I'm good to go, and I might just redraw it again. So to save you the pain of sitting through it again, I'll speed myself up. So just a little recap here. I've stuck in the copies that I'm not going to be using just into the sketchbook, next to the original sketch. It's always good to sort of remind yourself of your process and what you're doing. So I very often keep sketchbooks almost like journals. And then I've stuck this mock-up into here as well, just like we did with the mole. So we've got reference to how the idea began, and I've got the cartridge paper cut out. You can see that there's some bits, because it's much harder to cut out on cartridge paper, you get, I think, a bit more vulnerability in the sort of slim areas. Now I could shore that up with a bit of tape, or I could take it off entirely and create something else. So that might be something I tackle as we go through this. And then everything else is as it was. And this is Mr. Toad that I'm going to be using, and he might be stood there. I did think about cutting this trunk off and almost having it like one branch, and I think I'm going to do that. So close that out of the way. Let's just make these changes. So I'm just going to curve that off. And this just gives me a little bit more scope of presenting Toad. I might get the scissors on that because it's starting to hurt my fingers. And I'm actually going to cut into that corner as well. I'll take that one off. There we go. Yep. So that is letting me, should I want to, pop Toad here. It almost gives a bit of breathing room. It doesn't enclose him in too much. It also makes you want to open this up. I question this bit now. And I'm forever designing things like this, sort of reiterating ideas on a theme. And you could actually layer this. That would be quite nice, possibly. Possibly, so that might be an idea. Anyway, so this floppy circle at the top is annoying me, so that's coming off. So I'm simplifying all of the time. And then Mr. Toad might go there. So I've opened up this bit by cutting this part of the tree off, and that leaves me with some extra bits which I can then add on and layer up. And also, if you've got any cutouts from earlier, you can add these on, and it kind of layers things up for you quite nicely. It's almost like collaging before you've got a sense of the colours going on, and you're building up the shape of the tree. And that saves you cutting out the complicated shapes of a tree. And of course, you can always make a few more. Where there's a join line here, I might get some stuck over that line just to distract a little bit, like that. Okay. There we go. It just gives it a little bit more form. And of course, you can always add more on once you've painted as well. So let's have a look. So Toad could possibly stand there. He could also stand within there. Right, we want to get painting now. Okay, I just want to have a play around with palettes. Now, I'm thinking he is quite greeny browny, so I'm using the Turner Acrylic Gouache, and I'm going to mix it here first of all. Only need a tiny bit of burnt sienna, a tiny bit of light green. Ooh. Mix these together. It's kind of like a desaturated orange. That might work quite well. And if we had a little bit of white, we can play with some nice tints with that colour. Like that. So we want a colour that's gonna make that sing. So brown is part of the orange family. Opposite to orange is blue. But I think there's more green to be had here. So I'm gonna go in with a little bit more green. Maybe is it a bluey green? Maybe that's what would work well. And that would connect because we've got green in that mix there. Green and blue. Quite like that. And then a bit of white again. Quite like these tubes because they suck the paint back in once you've squeezed it, so the tops don't get stuck. A bit of white to give us a tint. That's nice. All right, I want a pop of colour. Do you know, I might go pink. So I've got two reds here. I've got permanent scarlet and permanent red. I think the permanent red would give a better pink. Tiny bit needed. I'm keeping my brush mucky because I'm kind of connecting my colours, and I only need a tiny bit of red. A bit of pink. Oh. Whoa, a bit more white needed. I think that needs to be brighter, doesn't it? Let's get the purple in there. Let's see how that works. Still got pink on my brush, haven't I? Yeah, I don't really like that pink. So just gonna grab a wet wipe. I think a bright pink would work. Just gonna soften that on the page. clean it off my brush. Let's mix something else up then. I'm looking for a colour pencil that's bright pink now, so it's going to be too wet to put on there. That's the sort of pink I'm after. Yes, that's the colour palette. Something quite sort of acid about that pink and green mix, which kind of goes with the character, and I quite like how that pink could go over and make checks look good over the green. Yeah, so that's it. So that was that pink, burnt sienna, green, there was a bit of blue, and of course there was white. There it is. So that's my colour palette, and of course I can intermix these any which way I want. So let's just sharpen this pink. It's always worth doing a little swatch. It just kind of keeps you on track and keeps everything working together. I'm just going to get rid of that red so it doesn't sneak in. No, I didn't use the purple in the end. Okay, right. So stick that up there. Now that's also going to be the colour palette that I'm going to use to colour this as well. Now, what we're going to do is get some tape, just some masking tape, and we're going to mask off the pictures on the wall. So we're just going to tape out the pictures on the wall with some masking tape. And just make it really easy for yourself. Just rectangles and squares to begin with. And I'll tell you what's easier, rather than sticking it, is doing it on the table first of all. And if you've got one of these grids, you can line it up. And then just overlap. And then it's much easier to peel those off your table or off your cutting mat and place them onto let's have a think, might go in the middle there-ish. Place them onto your cartridge paper. And what this is doing is masking the area so we can keep those areas nice and clean, and maybe draw into them after the paint dries. Need a few more. Make some small ones out of that. Some of you might be really particular about straight edges, perfect corners, but as you know, that's not me. So you do it the way that really works for you. We want, from our palette, we want a really funky interior, and our plan kind of had a bit of flooring as well, so let me just sketch that in. So a bit of flooring, bit of skirting. There's some trim around the door, and there's trim around the windows, like that. Alright, so everything on the wall is going to be pink. So I'm going to get a pass of pink down. how that covers with some white and what sort of effect I can get. Oh, got green because I've had some green on my brush, and actually I just might go with it. Back into the brush. Is it still wet? No, it's not. Let's do it with the pink. Put some stripes on the wallpaper. Okay, and then I think bright pink skirting boards. Grabbing a white, and I'm just pulling out one side of the stripe, the pink stripe on the wallpaper. And I can blend a little bit of the pink as well with the white if necessary. It's not doing a major job there. Okay. Right. I think we're gonna go pink floor. So what I tend to do when there's perspective is kind of find my middle area, and that line is sort of equally going away from me. Now it's got like a tram line, and then from there it's getting wider. Same the other way. And then a line across and another line across, and we can start to block in some of these. Thought I was filming, and I've peeled off all of the stickies to reveal some nice negative space, and any sort of little areas where you've got a little bit of a rip on the wallpaper, you can just tidy up like that. Now we can use the pink to sort of give a bit of a shadow underneath, and we might layer another colour as well. So pick the underside, and I'm going on the underside and the left side. Now, I reckon I can get a brown pencil to do a bit of line work. You've got a narration over the video just now, because sometimes when you're creating and thinking, and then to describe what you're doing, it's sometimes a bit difficult to do all at the same time. And so in those cases, what I tend to do is a little talk over like this. So I've got a brown pencil, and I'm just adding a bit of shadow or a bit of frame detail. And I'm also using a golden yellow to sort of add a gold tinge to the frames as well. Totally up to you what you want to do here. Be as fancy pants as you want to. And it's all about sort of trying to think of the character of Toad and how ornate or how fancy would he be, what sort of interior design would he be going to town on. The brown pencil is pretty good for sort of adding any shadows as well. So you can see I'm adding shadows into the corners by the skirting boards, and I'm mixing a little bit of brown to block in the doors as well. And that colour is also useful to add a heavier shadow underneath the picture frames, and it really makes the picture frames pop. Now you could leave these picture frames quite light and just do a thin pencil portrait in each of them. I end up going quite dark and just enjoying filling those spaces in. So while I've got the brown on my palette, I'm making sure that I can get the gate covered in the same colour and the tree trunk, and mixing a little bit of green, I cover the leaves on that front section as well. Over the next little while, you'll see me colouring in sections like colouring in the door just here, and sticking to that same palette, which is quite restrictive, but actually unifies everything and makes everything look of one world rather than lots of different pieces of different worlds. So whenever I'm mixing a colour on the palette, I'm mixing one colour to another colour of the original colours that I've used. And if I'm using colour pencil, they match the paint colours that I'm using as well. So I'm not going far from my original choices. Now you'll notice on the desk some mugshots of some frogs, which you've got in your download section. And I actually used those to create portraits on the wall. Originally I was thinking of doing lots of portraits of Toad himself, but I was thinking maybe they could be his ancestors. And I started having fun with exaggerating googly eyes and what appeared to be sad faces. And it's totally up to you how you want to approach this. It might be that you've got a wholly different idea what might go in those picture frames. And you could, of course, if you were good at scaling down and printing, you could print things that could be stuck in those picture frames as well. I actually really enjoyed I guess it's just the colouring in of this project. It's really relaxing and meditative, and once you've got an idea of the structure that you're working to, you can break down these different colouring in sections and just chip away at it. I really enjoyed layering my colours up in the backgrounds of these toad portraits. And again, I'm still using the same colours, and it's really starting to pull itself together now. And then once all of the colouring in was done, I was able to play around with the position of Toad, and I started to take photographs of him stood at the front of the house, in front of the gate, or inside in the portrait room, and it becomes like a little set where you can get some really cool photographs, especially if you zoom in and be quite creative with your cropping. I'll try to put a few examples up of some stills just at the end of this video, just so you get an idea of what I mean by it feeling and looking like a stage and being creative with the cropping. Anyway, it's a full-on project, this one, so hopefully this lands at a time where you might have a couple of days off, maybe for Easter, and who knows what the weather's doing. So this one can be one that you can just chip away at and really have fun just building the scene, building the character, and then presenting it in lots of different ways.